I've been thinking a lot lately about how character motivations can serve as a source of conflict, both for the character themselves and for your plot as a whole. I think for a lot of writers, myself included, we don't use character motivations to their fullest possible extent, and that's part of what I want to talk about today. When characters aren't working, it's often because the underlying motivations of that character are poorly defined or ill-suited towards the plot of the story. In this case, you often end up with characters who feel like pawns that are just acting out the plot to make it happen. Motivations are the underlying reasons that a character does what they do. This is in contrast to goals, which are related to motivation, but are tangible actions that the character takes in order to work towards their motivation. A character is going to have many goals over the course of a story, while their motivation will likely stay the same throughout. Usually it takes something bigger like a character arc for a character's motivation to change. A goal is something that can be completed. Motivations are more long-term. They last beyond the completion of a goal. For example, a detective character might have the goal of finding a clue at a crime scene. This goal might be in service to a larger motivation around upholding the law and maintaining justice, that sort of thing. Finding a clue at a crime scene will lead to a suspect, which will create the goal of finding that suspect, which will then create a goal of interrogating that suspect, which will then create a goal of getting a confession from that suspect, all of which is done under the auspices of this overarching motivation, which is to maintain justice. And this is a magnifying glass. He's not holding on to a dismembered stick figure. Although he might be, that might be the crime that he's investigating. This is why this isn't an art channel. If you're interested in a character-driven story, creating some conflict around the motivations of the characters themselves is a good way to explore the elements of the character in more detail. And there are a few potential sources of conflict that can center around motivations. The first way I can think to do this is to have some vagueness around the motivations themselves. Present a situation that's not black and white, something that has some shades of gray to it. So for example, with our detective character, upholding justice is their central motivation, so by extension they desire that all of their actions are done in a lawful manner. In order to maintain justice, they have to act in accordance with justice itself. But suppose that they need to do something illegal in order to capture a murderer. Is the trade-off of violating their motivation worth the price of punishing someone who they know is guilty of something? A lot of motivations, when you boil them down, have opportunities for this grayness, and that can create a lot of conflict. This might be because the motivation requires a whole bunch of decisions to be made about what constitutes good and bad, or it could be because the character hasn't fleshed out their motivation enough. They're motivated by something, but they don't understand the underlying reasons why that thing motivates them. They haven't done that exploration, so when they're presented with any sort of conflict around that motivation, it becomes very distressing. Another option here that has more to do with goals, but can likewise create conflict around motivation, is to have multiple goals which serve the character's motivation, but have them be only able to choose one of those goals. Say you have a character whose motivation centers around supporting their family. They have a potential goal to pursue a promotion at work, which would provide more financial support for their family, but maybe they also have like a kid's soccer game or something that they need to go to. Your characters are going to have limited resources with which to pursue their goals, and they will need to make sacrifices. The conflict here centers around which of the potential goals best works towards their motivation. Something that may be difficult to answer. You want to present the character with a difficult choice. You want to make actualizing their motivation a maze, not a clear path. Another thing to consider here is that motivations don't necessarily exist at a single point, but rather along a continuum. The way you create a motivation is you take a goal and then make it more and more abstract until you arrive at a motivation. You can also look at it the other way around, where you take a motivation like do the right thing and make it more and more concrete until you arrive at a goal that is an actual actionable thing that you can do to work towards that motivation. Back to our justice-loving detective character, if we make their maintain justice motivation a little bit more abstract, we might get to things like do the right thing or be morally good. If we make it more concrete, we might get into upholding the law or make sure wrongdoers are punished. And then if we go even a layer down from that, we might get to apprehend murderers, solve this specific murder, find a clue that helps to solve this specific murder, which gets into very concrete goal-like territory. You can create conflict when the direction that you move, either up or down along this continuum, causes problems within the motivation of the character. Suppose our detective character is actually part of a dystopian authoritarian government. They find themselves in a system that is inherently evil and corrupt, and they've been working to uphold the laws of that system. Now, upholding the law and maintaining justice would serve their overarching motivation of doing the right thing, but when the form of justice they are upholding is not just, then you have conflict. The route that they've taken to go from an abstract motivation down to concrete goals has gone down a path that actually doesn't serve their motivation. Wait, so the police force with the skull and the giant snake on its logo, whose motto is "Serve the Emperor at all costs," isn't full of morally upstanding people? Who would have ever thought that? This is usually the case where the character needs to go through some kind of arc. Really, this is about putting the character into doubt about their motivation, which usually leads to some kind of crisis that could result in their entire lives unraveling as they discover they've been searching for the wrong thing all along. Potentially, this could lead the character to changing their motivations entirely, or it may simply move them up the abstraction ladder towards a higher motivation that they will then concretify to try to figure out what goals they should actually be pursuing. They might, at the end of the day, be following the same abstract motivation, but they're taking a different path from that motivation down to the goals that they're actually executing on. The takeaway here, I think, is not to consider character motivations as a simple static idea, which a lot of authors often do. Given sufficient conflict, the character's motivations might very well change, either because the character discovers that they aren't actually living up to their motivations, or that they lack definition of their motivations in the first place. Also consider that motivations are multi-layered and different choices that the character makes may or may not conform with all of those layers of their motivation, moving from concrete up to abstract. I think if you're having problems with your character motivations, or if a character just isn't working, doing this work of going up that abstraction ladder from the concrete goals that you're having them pursue up through what's motivating those goals until you get to the core central motivation of the character can be a good way to resolve a lot of problems. It can also be a way to generate potential character arcs or conflicts for your novel. Speaking of conflict, I'm having a conflict right now because I've run out of things to say on this video because we're at the end of this video. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.